In the spring of 1845, the British government faced a decision that would shape the fate of millions. A disease had appeared in Ireland's potato fields, turning healthy crops into rotting pulp within days. The blight, as it became known, threatened the primary food source for nearly half of Ireland's 8 million people. Officials in London received reports throughout the summer. The question before them was simple. How should the state respond to a failing harvest? Ireland had been part of the United Kingdom for 45 years. Its economy was structured around large estates owned by landlords, many of whom lived in England. Small tenant farmers grew potatoes on tiny plots, paying rent through labor or cash when possible. The potato had become central to Irish life because it grew well in poor soil and provided more nutrition per acre than grain. A single acre could feed a family for a year. This efficiency had allowed Ireland's population to grow rapidly, but it also created a hidden vulnerability. When the blight struck in 1845, it destroyed roughly 1/3 of the potato crop. The British Prime Minister, Robert Peel, recognized the danger and ordered emergency shipments of Indian corn from America. The corn arrived and was sold at cost through relief committees. Peel also attempted to repeal tariffs on imported grain, believing cheaper food from abroad would help offset the loss. His actions were measured but limited. The prevailing economic theory of the time held that governments should not interfere too deeply in markets. Direct aid, many believed, would create dependency and discourage private enterprise. Peel's government fell in the summer of 1846, and a new administration took power under Lord John Russell. Russell's advisors were committed to a philosophy known as laissez-faire, which held that economic problems would resolve themselves if the market remained free. The blight returned that year, worse than before. Nearly the entire potato crop failed. By autumn, reports of starvation began reaching London. The new government responded by establishing public works programs, paying people to build roads and other infrastructure. In theory, this would provide wages without disrupting the market for food. The public works system quickly became overwhelmed. Wages were set deliberately low to avoid competing with private employers. Workers, already weakened by hunger, labored in winter conditions for pay that could not buy enough food to sustain their families. Records indicate that by early 1847, more than 700,000 people were employed on these projects. Yet deaths from starvation and disease were rising. The roads being built often led nowhere in particular. The system had been designed to provide employment, not to address the immediate crisis of hunger. In the spring of 1847, the government changed course. Officials closed the public works and opened soup kitchens instead. For several months, these kitchens fed as many as 3 million people daily. The program was effective, but it was also temporary. By autumn, responsibility for relief shifted to Irish poor law unions, local administrative bodies funded through property taxes. Landlords were now expected to support their tenants through poorhouses. Many landlords, facing financial strain themselves, began evicting tenants who could not pay rent. Evictions climbed into the tens of thousands. Throughout this period, Ireland continued to export food. Grain, cattle, butter, and other products left Irish ports bound for England and beyond, even as people starved in the countryside. This was not a secret. It was visible and documented. The economic logic was straightforward. Ireland's exports paid debts and rents that landlords owed to creditors, often in England. Stopping exports would have required the government to intervene directly in property rights and market mechanisms, actions that conflicted with the dominant political philosophy. Officials in London argued that Ireland needed to become self-reliant. Emergency measures, they believed, should not continue indefinitely. Historians suggest that decision-makers in Westminster did not fully grasp the scale of what was happening. Ireland was geographically close but culturally and economically distant from the centers of British power. Reports were filtered through administrators who had their own assumptions and biases. Many officials believed that Irish poverty was a long-standing problem, not an emergency requiring exceptional action. Others worried that too much aid would bankrupt the treasury or set a precedent for state intervention elsewhere. The choices made were not acts of deliberate cruelty. They were the product of a system that valued economic principles over immediate human need. The consequences unfolded over years. By 1852, Ireland's population had fallen by more than 2 million people. Roughly 1 million died from starvation and related diseases. Another million emigrated, many on overcrowded ships where disease spread quickly. Entire communities disappeared. The social fabric of rural Ireland was torn apart. Survivors carried memories of loss that shaped Irish identity for generations. The famine deepened resentment toward British rule and became a touchstone in the movement for Irish independence. The financial cost extended beyond Ireland. The poor law system collapsed under the burden. Many Irish estates went bankrupt, leading to a restructuring of land ownership. The British government spent money on relief efforts, though historians debate whether it was sufficient given the scale of need. More significantly, the famine damaged Britain's international reputation and complicated its relationship with Ireland for the next century. Evidence points to a crisis that could have been managed differently had the response prioritized food security over economic theory. What made this mistake expensive was not a single wrong decision, but a series of choices rooted in assumptions that seemed reasonable at the time. Officials believed markets would adjust, that local responsibility was appropriate, that temporary aid should not become permanent. These ideas were not fringe views. They reflected mainstream thinking among educated, well-intentioned people. The tragedy emerged from the gap between theory and reality, between what policymakers expected to happen and what actually occurred in fields and villages across Ireland. The Irish famine became a reference point in later discussions about government responsibility during crises. It showed how systems designed for normal circumstances can fail catastrophically when conditions change. It revealed the danger of prioritizing abstract principles over observable suffering. The mistake was not in lacking information. Reports arrived throughout the crisis. The mistake was in how that information was interpreted and what kinds of action were deemed acceptable in response. The costs of those years in Ireland, measured in lives disrupted and futures lost, became clear only as time passed. What had seemed like prudent governance proved to be inadequate to the moment. The consequences outlasted the officials who made the choices, shaping a country and its relationship with Britain for generations to come.